Okay, so what I'd like to do in the next half hour or so is analyze some um, halachic implications of the state of Israel. And it was the fact that we have a state of Israel, what those implications of pi halakha were, and how they are created tremendous ramifications. And a lot of it will be based on the writings of Hacham Ovadia Yosef, who wrote extensively on this topic. And it's also fitting that we do that. We are approaching his 100th birthday in a couple of months, and the impact that he has created and had on halakha implies actually to all gamuts of halakha, as well as the national. And so we're going to discuss some halakha l'maaseh, relevance, again, issues that were created by a modern day state of Israel. Before I begin, I'd like to, of course, thank the SEA for their tremendous encouragement to all of the lecturers and really the guidance they've been showing the last couple of months, the innovative way that they are helping to spread Torah and encourage Torah to be spread. Hazak u'baruch. I'd also like to make mention that today all the classes are dedicated in memory of a true dear community leader, as well as a personal friend. Mr. Stanley Chera A represented community leadership. He lived and breathed the betterment for the benefit of the communities, always thinking about moving forward. So many times we've had personal interactions on many issues, and it was really always a pleasure to see his vibrance and his strength, and sometimes came across tough, but when you scratch the surface, it was really soft, and he cared deeply for the community, as his children, my dear friends, do, right? Aiki, Jaime, and Richie, as well as his dear wife. Hashem should give them a hamam, and they should continue in his legacy, and they are, to help build and benefit our community. Okay, the issues I want to talk about this afternoon are going to be the issues of 3 issues, and I don't know that we'll get fully to all 3, but the main issues that we're going to talk about are going to be, the first one is mitzvat yishuv Eretz Yisrael b'zman hazeh. Is there a mitzvah of settlement in the land of Israel today? Secondly, we will hopefully talk about the issues of land for peace in the modern day state of Israel, its permissibility. And third, if we have some time, if not, we'll just scratch the surface on that issue, is dealing and making deals with terrorists and exchanging prisoners for prisoners. What I will start again, as I mentioned, with the first, which is the relevance, which is the beginning of the mitzvah of Yishuv Eretz Yisrael in our day, and the arguments and the discussions about that. The beginning of this discussion really starts with Harambam. Harambam has us guessing a little bit. Harambam counts in his Sefer HaMitzvot all 613 mitzvot. But the challenge here is that Harambam does not count living in Israel and building the settlement of Israel as one of the 613 mitzvot. For some reason, that seems to has escaped the counting. And this leads his great commentator, the Ramban, Nachmanides, to really harshly question Harambam, why he left out the mitzvah of settling in Israel as one of the 613 mitzvot. Anyone who's read the Ramban's literature on the state of Israel throughout, and as far as I know, there was a class today, I think on one of by my good friend, Rabbi Dana. He also discussed this issue about Ramban's attitude to Eretz Yisrael. So the Ramban accuses the Rambam that he forgot, that he literally words the language shachach. He forgot to include Yerushat Haaretz. He forgot to include that it's a mitzvah, that we should not leave the land of Israel in the hands of any other nation other than the Jewish people, right? He forgot to actually say that it is forbidden to leave Israel to Chutz La'aretz. And he forgot the Gemara that says that whoever does leave Eretz Yisrael to Chutz La'aretz is as if, God forbid, he has no God. And the Ramban brings many of the famous stories in the Talmud to show how important they held living in the land of Israel. And the Tanaitic and Amoraitic rabbis of the Talmud made tremendous efforts to actually, when it was very difficult to live in Eretz Yisrael. So he's a harsh critic of the Rambam. Who steps up here to the defense of Harambam is a medieval rabbi whose name was Rabbi Yitzhak de Leon, who wrote a book called the Megillat Esther. And in the Megillat Esther, to defend Harambam's omission, the Megillat Esther comes up with a theory, and he says, do you know why Harambam left it out? Harambam left this mitzvah out because it's inapplicable in our days. It doesn't apply. The mitzvah of Yishuv Eretz Yisrael, living and settling the land of Israel, only applied in the pre-exile times. And therefore, in our days, the mitzvah doesn't apply until the Mashiach will come. There is no mitzvah, according to the Megillat Esther, to settle, to live in the land of Israel. And he says, and the opposite. It is we were commanded not to rebel against the nations. He brings a very famous Gemara that we are forbidden to actually capture the land with strength, and we are commanded Shelo na'aleh b'homa until the times of the Mashiach. And it's for this reason, says the Megillat Esther, that Harambam leaves out the mitzvah of settling the land of Israel. So this is now we have the Ramban's critique, and what seems to be a defense on his behalf by the Megillat Esther, which creates a pretty interesting and radical shita that the mitzvah of Israel doesn't apply until the time of Mashiach. Now, the problem with this Megillat Esther is that Harambam, in many places in his other works, most chiefly among them is the Mishneh Torah. The Mishneh Torah discusses in many different areas the relevance even today of settling the land of Israel. In addition, it's also an insufficient answer because Harambam in the Taryag mitzvot counts many mitzvot that don't apply today. So the answer of it doesn't apply today doesn't seem to be a sufficient answer, because Harambam, for example, counts building the Bet HaMikdash as a mitzvah. So that would be difficult. And many mitzvot that are inapplicable only when we have a full state based on with a Bet HaMikdash are counted by Rambam as mitzvot. So the answer doesn't seem to work on the one hand. And second, it doesn't seem to be true because Rambam, for example, brings a very famous halakha. You have a man and a woman, and they're married. And one of the two decides they want to move to Israel. So either of the two, the woman included, if she wishes to do that, can force a divorce. So, for example, if the man wants to move and the woman does not, he could divorce her and he does not have to give her her premarital agreement of the ketubah. If the woman wishes to move to Israel, the man is forced to give her the get if he doesn't want to go, and he must give her the ketubah. So we see here the idea of living in Eretz Israel, according to Rambam, even in our times, seems to be a very important thing. Rambam was also asked this in a responsa, and Rambam was asked a question against this halakha. He goes, I don't understand. We have a problem. This halakha can be abused because all of a sudden, somebody doesn't want to give his wife a ketubah. He doesn't like her anymore. She has this massive ketubah. He makes it up. I want to go move to Israel. Said it. Now all of a sudden, he decided he could get out of, and she doesn't want to live, she could get out of the marriage without giving a ketubah. Rambam answers that we will investigate and we will make sure that the situation is true. But he says at the end, this is the halakha, and I can't change the halakha for your concerns. There are those who say that this question that I asked against the Megillat Esther is not really a good question, because they see the reason that a husband and wife are encouraged to move to Eretz Israel, and the halakha is so radical, is not to fulfill the mitzvah of living in Eretz Israel, but rather to fulfill all the other mitzvot that actually would apply that you could perform in Eretz Israel, such as Trumot, Masrot, and the many other mitzvot. But the mitzvah of Yishuv Eretz Israel, maybe the Megillah Esther is correct, and your question is not. There are other proofs, however, that are halachot in the Gemara, as well as brought down by Rambam himself. For example, the issue of a person may buy a house in Eretz Israel and have the contract written by a non-Jew on Shabbat. Even though writing is a prohibition from the Torah, you tell the non-Jew to do an Isur Deoraita to accomplish the mitzvah of buying property in Eretz Israel. No other mitzvah has that leniency. All other mitzvot, if you want to tell a goy, you can only tell a goy to do an Isur D'Rabbanan to perform that mitzvah. So for example, a Brit Milah, and you're missing the knife, and now you don't have the knife, you could tell a goy to bring the knife, but not through the Shut Rabim, which would be Deoraita, through areas that are not prohibited from the Torah. And similarly, all the mitzvot, we can tell a non-Jew to perform a rabbinic isur, but a biblical isur, no. But to buy a house in Israel, we can tell the non-Jew to perform what would be for me a biblical prohibition of writing. So we see here that and that halakha applies even today. So we see here there seems to be a great mitzvah, mamash, of living in Eretz Israel. Now, this is buying a house in Israel. This is not saying I'm going to live there to do Trumot and Masrot. This mitzvah is clearly simply and only for the settlement of the land of Israel. And the Ribash tells why is this such a special mitzvah? Because this is a mitzvah that is what's called a mitzvah mitkayemet le'olam. This is not a one-time mitzvah. This is a mitzvah that stays with us throughout the settling of the land of Israel. The Tosfot in Ketubot, which is often quoted as to say we shouldn't go to Eretz Israel, is explicit in why. They mentioned that we cannot go to Israel in today's day. He says because there are so many mitzvot that need to be performed, and we are worried we'd be lax in the performance of those because we won't be able to perform them. Remember, Tosfot was living at the time of tremendous turmoil in the land of Israel during the actual conquest of the Crusaders. That's the time of the Tosfot. Life in Israel was extremely difficult to survive. And of course, performing the mitzvot might have been very difficult. And so therefore, we need to put that comment of Tosfot in its historical context. So where does this take us today? So there's been 4 different approaches amongst the poskim of our day on how we look at this mitzvah of Yishuv Eretz Israel. The first one will start, and we'll go in order of their approaches. First one will start is the opinion of the Satmar Rebbe, Rav Yoel, and he wrote a book in which he claimed exactly as the Megillat Esther claimed, that the opinion of the Megillat Esther is true, that it is forbidden for the Jews to establish a structured community in Eretz Israel until the times of the Mashiach. And that was his opinion. Well, today, Satmar is probably alone in that opinion. At the time of the state, there were many other opinions of contemporary rabbis who held that opinion. One of the famous is the very famous Munkacher Rebbe, who also took that opinion, who had a student who perished in the Holocaust, but who wrote a book, Ema Banim Smicha, claiming that this was a tremendous error and it led many Jews to their deaths in the during the Holocaust because they refused to go to Eretz Israel when they had the opportunity, when they could have. On a similar note, Chacham ben Zion Uziel was for a time, who was at one point the Rishon LeZion. Before he was time, he was the rabbi of the Jews in Salonika in Greece, and they also refused to move to Eretz Israel because they had a tremendously thriving Jewish community with a religious life, and life in Israel was not as conducive, and they refused. And of course, that community was decimated by the Nazis. There was the main and at least real Sephardic community totally destroyed. But Moshe Feinstein, and Igrot Moshe, he has a little bit of a more nuanced approach. And his approach is saying, of course, there's a mitzvah to live and to establish life and the community and the state in Eretz Israel today. However, that mitzvah he compares it, there's two types of mitzvot of wearing tzitzit, and this is the paradigm that he uses. He says, you cannot have a four-cornered garment without tzitzit on it. If you do so, you're violating a mitzvah aseh. However, it is a good mitzvah to put the four-cornered garment on. So there's two mitzvot. One, if I have a four-cornered garment, I must put on tzitzit. If I don't have a four-cornered garment, it is proper to put one on to do the mitzvah of tzitzit. So he calls that the living in Eretz Israel is like the mitzvah of tzitzit, but not like the mitzvah of tzitzit that I'm wearing a four-cornered garment without tzitzit, because if that would be the case, then life outside of Eretz Israel would be absolutely prohibited. And he believes that this is what we call a mitzvah kiyumit, that it is that if one can establish himself in Israel, then yes, one should be in Israel and stay in Israel. But one has no obligation to go out of his way and establish himself in the state of Israel. If you're there, you must stay there. If you do live there, you cannot leave. But if you've never, that's as if you have a four-cornered garment on. But if you've never gone there, you don't have to put the four-cornered garment on. You do not have to go. Hacham Matlub Abadi has a tshuva in Magen Badi in which he disputes this. He says, even Vashor Harambam holds it's a mitzvah aseh today, like we said. And the Harambam and the Ramban, there's no argument. The only dispute is, according to Harambam, it's a mitzvah midirabanan post-exile. And according to the Ramban, it's a mitzvah b'doraita. But it's a mitzvah, one must live in Israel, one must go and establish himself in Israel, he has the ability. It's just not a deoraita like the others would say, and that's why he couldn't count it in one of the 613 mitzvot. But nevertheless, if you read the Mishneh Torah, it's obligation, and the obligation is midrabanan. Hacham Ovadia Yosef, he holds absolutely not. It's going to, there is no difference between Harambam and the Ramban. It's a mitzvah today, like it always was, just like the Ramban says. And it's a deoraita. So why didn't he count it? Simply, all we have to do is go back to the writings of Harambam himself in his introduction to the Sefer HaMitzvot. And he says if he has a mitzvah which encompasses many mitzvot, he's not going to count it as one of the 613. Although it is applicable today like it's applicable at any time, but we don't need to count it as one of the 613 mitzvot. And so therefore, Harambam will say, absolutely, the mitzvah of living in Israel applies today as it applied in early days. But he just didn't count it because it is a general mitzvah which has so many other mitzvot that impacts Trumot, Ma'asrot, Shemitah, many mitzvot, Leket, Shikah, so many mitzvot that are connected to it, so he cannot count it as one. It's almost too powerful to count as one. And I'm going to close this part of it by actually reading what he says. He says, and really, at the end, Shikuli Yisodi, to push the Jews outside of Israel to come and establish themselves in Israel. One of the main things which is to show that today, thankfully, the land of Israel is the center of Torah learning for the world, in quantity as well as in quality. And therefore, this greatness of Israel is not only in its land, but in the Torah itself. And then he says, Omnam, even though Gam be'arzot habrit, in America, there's also Merkazei Torah centers. But he says, I feel bad because for every one, they lose 10. He goes, for every one that comes out as a scholar, they lose 10 in terms of what he calls intermarriage and assimilation. So therefore, fortunate are those who come to live in the land of Israel, and they actually will be fortunate in gashmiyut, in physicality, as well as in ruhiyut. And I think today we see the physicality part of it. In addition to ruhiyut, I just received word, by next week, Israel will be opening elementary schools already from K to 4. And really, the way they've shown themselves in this challenging time has been a light unto the nations. And it's a tremendous Kiddush Hashem that the land of Israel and the people of Israel have taken it, probably became one of the safest places on earth in handling this virus. And he closes by saying that there are 3 types of neshamot. There's nefesh, ruach, neshama. Nefesh is given to all human beings. Ruach is given to people that visit Israel, but a neshama, the highest level, is given to the people that actually make Israel their dwelling. Okay, this is the first tshuva that I wanted to do. What I'd like to do is, I certainly won't have time for the fully the second and third, certainly not the third, but I will go through it a little bit quicker. The question of exchanging land for peace. Land for peace, right, is a big debate politically as well as religiously. And Acham Ovadia discusses it. Now, we have an isur of giving a place of dwelling in the land of Israel to non-Jews. And that isur is from lo tehonim. We cannot give them dwelling in the land. The Rambam brings this isur, and he says when the Jews are in charge, they may not allow non-Jews to live in the land unless they accept 3 things. All the 7 mitzvot b'nei Noach, being excessive taxation and servitude to the Jewish people. Misim and avdut, sheva mitzvot. That is the qualifications that Rambam brings to allow a non-Jew to live in Eretz Israel. It seems clear he's talking now, even if they are not idolaters. The Avad, the arch commentator of the Rambam, says that this pasuk of Lo Tehonim doesn't apply today to non-Jews. It applies only to the 7 nations that we were meant to conquer. And the rest of the people can live there. Rashi says as well, it's also about the 7 nations. The Ramban in here is not as radical as Rambam, and he says, no, it only applies to idolaters. If they're idolaters, you cannot allow them to have ownership of the land of Israel, but non-idolaters you can. Now that's a big difference because Muslims, to whom Rambam and many authorities are not considered idolaters, would it be okay to allow them to acquire a place in Eretz Israel? And there are many stories. The Rishon L'Tzion Rabbi Miyuhas Bechor Shmuel in his book Mizbeach Adama permitted selling land under certain situations to Muslims in those days, as did Rabbi Eliyahu Mani. Now, so this is a big debate. And the question comes now, returning land for peace now becomes the question of pikuach nefesh. Is it permitted to, even if it is a violation of lo tehonim, according to some it's not to give it to a Muslim, but even if you would say it is, would it be permitted to do so to save Jewish lives, if we can prove that it would save Jewish lives? So, Acham Ovadia brings one approach, that we say that Hizkiah Melech was rebuked by the rabbis because he took off some of the doors of the Hechal and sent it to the Assyrian rabbi as a gift to so that there would not be war. And the rabbis rebuked him, and that she should have had trust in God. So many people say, you see, we should not give back land, even for Pikuach Nefesh. This would violate our trust in HaKadosh Baruch Hu. However, the Nitziv of Volozhin explains that this Gemara is not what it might seem. He says, Hizkiah was known as a tremendous Hasid. He lived on faith, and therefore daily miracles were performed for him. As we know, when the Assyrians eventually did come and try and start a war, that night, angels came, and it's described in the Nevi, and decimated the Assyrian army camp. So therefore, Hizkiah should have had further trust in HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Makes sense. Even though today we've seen miracles, in the natural sense, our generation still, when there are wars come, we still lose lives. And therefore, we cannot trust on the level of miracles of Hizkiyahu. The Ben Ish Hai, the Ben Yoyada says, by the way, Hizkiyahu, he didn't give in. Even though the rabbis and his Sanhedrin criticized him, he stood firm. And Hizkiyahu believed he was still right. The question now comes, which questions is, can you do it from Pikuach Nefesh, is if we define our status as what we call a milchemet mitzvah, a war of a mitzvah, then, which is the way that Ramban defines it, and the Minhat Chinuch says, in a war, even any milchemet mitzvah, you know you're going to lose life. We don't engage in milchemet mitzvah with the assumption of such a miraculous victory that we can be somech on the nest that no one will die. And so therefore, a milchama, by its definition, engages in, ignores the concept of Pikuach Nefesh. Without going into all of the back and forth and the discussions, and he brings back the Megillat Esther's opinion, he says at the end of the day, his opinion is that in our capturing of the land is limited. Since we are limited by the opinions of the nations, specifically the United Nations that gifted it to us, that concept of a capture cannot be fully described as a full milchemet mitzvah, and it is a Hamovadya's opinion that if you can ascertain, and you would ascertain so by the experts in the field in policy, just like you would ascertain so by the experts of the field in if you were going to violate Shabbat or any other mitzvah, based on the experts in the field in this arena, we would establish, but if there is a Pikuach Nefesh, it would be permitted to give back land for peace. Now, Chacham wrote this psak initially in the 70s, and he's maintained a lot of that, but as in the later years, his perspective was that I said this only if we can know and we could be assured that it would be a true peace that would avoid Pikuach Nefesh. However, he became much more skeptical of that approach, that he can receive and come to the end of the true peace. And he noted that many of the experts in the field were questioning. I'll just use the last 2 to 3 minutes that are left to me by summarizing the third question, which obviously I'm not going to go in depth, which was the question that was asked to him before the Entebbe raid. And the question is, can you give up prisoners to receive prisoners back? And here he used again his Pikuach Nefesh rule. And the question is, can you put yourself in the problem would be, of course, if that we would release the prisoners, they would most probably come back and attempt to create havoc in the land of Israel. Hamovadya's final halakha there was that it would be permitted, and he encouraged that same policy in the Gilad Shalit case. Hamovadya's approach here was that people that are in captivity and they're threatened to be killed, they're in a definite sakana, and an immediate sakana. And it's true that the entire nation is put in a sakana when we release these terrorists, because there's no doubt that they're going to continue to try and do their terror. But he says this is far more removed, and it's not as definite. And so therefore, his opinion was that it can be done. Many disagreed with Hamovadya, and he said that's not true. When we see and when we track these people, we know definitely, and this tracking was done for the Gilad Shalit people, and that they are saying that tens and tens of Jews have lost their lives in the land of Israel at the hands of these very murderers. So the question here is a difficult question, and this was a Chacham Ovadiah's approach. I'll just close with the following anecdote. One, I've heard this shiur from Chacham Ovadiah more than once, and one time that I heard it was more than once was in a Musad Harav Kook. In the beginning of the summer, they would have a Torah Exposium where Chacham Ovadiah would always be the first speaker. All the Gedolei Torah, Rishon LeZions, and many important people would come. And I heard Chacham Ovadiah talking about the Entebbe Psak a few times. The last time I heard him, which was the last time I heard him in Musad Harav Kook, he was giving this shiur, and sitting right next to him, or a few seats away actually, was the Prime Minister of Israel, Bibi Netanyahu. And I was wondering how he was going to end this shiur, because he was basically going to say that the raid didn't have to happen and that they could have transferred soldiers. They could have actually released the prisoners for that. And here you have Bibi Netanyahu sitting next to him, whose brother gave his life for this raid. And I was just wondering the entire shiur how this is going to end, because if he came to his conclusion, it would be. And Chacham Ovadiah very shrewdly avoided he gave the shiur and avoided his final conclusion, and instead of giving the final conclusion that he normally gave, went to praise the courage of the soldiers, and specifically Yoni Netanyahu, and was able to say the halakha while making the people around them, and specifically at that point the prime minister, feeling very good about themselves and about the Jewish sacrifice that was taken. So this was again an example of Chacham Ovadiah Yosef on all of these levels, dealing with the most prevalent, pressing questions, not just individually, but that presses the state as a nation, the Jewish people as a nation. He shied away from nothing. We could go into lengthy about his Yom Kippur Psak, where almost 1,000 women were permitted when no one else would do it. And this was how Chacham Ovadiah laid down the halakha. But as well, he knew how to do it with the finesse of a leader, with the diplomacy that would make that even when the conclusions might be something that people around him would agree or disagree, he knew how to put it together in a way that wouldn't offend anybody and that would make all people feel good. And this was the great leader and his psakim, Chacham Ovadiah Yosef. I went 2 minutes over time. I know you're ready to go to the next class. If there are any questions at this point, I'll take them. Anyone who wishes to leave, of course, can. And if there are any questions, you could ask. And there's someone who will just be able to unmute you, I think.
Rabbi,
Okay.
when you
Yep.
Jesse Salem here, when you were saying about buying land on Shabbat, you're talking about buying from a goy only. Now
Yes.
you're done talking about
Correct. That's true. I should have clarified that. To buy land from a goy, you're allowed to have the contract written on Shabbat. It's an excellent point. I should have been more clear.
No, sorry.
Anybody else?
I'm ready to buy, Rabbi.
Okay. From a Jew or from a goy?
It
Any-
doesn't matter.
Beautiful class. Really beautiful class.
Who's that?
Mari Mizrahi.
Okay. Thank
Am
you.
I coming in clear? Am I coming in clear? I
Yes.
just wanted
Yes.
to add one nuance to Harambam. You mentioned the case of a man or a woman that wants to get a get for making aliyah. And it's very interesting because the Megillat Esther is the first, to my knowledge, pre-modern rabbi that brings up the 3 Shvuot.
Right.
And you correct me if I'm wrong, but what's very interesting there about Harambam, if you look at Masechet Gitin, there's about 10 halachot that he brings in Hilchot Melachim, all together from that, extended sugya. It seems almost like an intentional omission that Harambam doesn't mention the 3 swears because he's clearly aware of it and he doesn't mention it at all.
That's a good point. I didn't mention this. The 3 swears is an Agadah. And Harambam has definite approaches, and his distinction between Halakha and Agadah is very clear. And so therefore, while the 3 swears is it's true, it's a Gemara, but it is an Agadah. And the distinction between that story and transferring it to Halakha as it affects Yishuv Israel is another difficulty in the approach of the Megillat Esther. Right. I will release you to go on to the next class. Thank you.
Baruch.
Chazak
Thank
Baruch.
you.
Beautiful, Rabbi. Beautiful.
Wonderful class.
Thank you. I appreciate your participation. Thank
חזק
you.
וברוך.
And Bezrat Hashem, Yom Ha'atzmaut Sameach. Bezrat Hashem on Wednesday.